stage as he will chair the next session as well. Mr. Lars Band, Country Chief of DRR UNICEF India, is already here. He's going to be one of our speakers in the second plenary session. I'm calling on Mr. Ashish Singh, Regional and National Policies and Plans for Children and DRR, SDMC. Could you please come on stage, sir, Mr. Singh? Ms. Sudeshna Chatterjee, CEO, Action for Children's Environment. Mr. Ray Kancharla, Save the Children, India. And we have, as part of this session and in the spirit of the theme of community and involving the most vulnerable, we have child speakers. We have Sarita Mohanty from Kendrapara, Odisha. She's in the 9th standard and is 14 years old. We have Suchishmita Sahu, Malkangari, Odisha. She's 22 years old and part of the youth club. Ashwini from Rajamundry, 14 years of age and in the 9th standard. Sonam from Darbhanga, Bihar. She's 12 years old and in the 8th standard. I will allow the children to say when they speak what they're going to speak about.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the second plenary session, and I promise you that this is going to be the most interesting and most useful, most energizing session of the entire World Congress. We are going to talk about children and disaster risk reduction. In the previous session, we ended on the note, several speakers in the previous session, most notably Anju Sharma ji and Professor Amita Singh talked about the need to work at the local level, at the community level, need to work with children and women. And here we are going to discuss, what children can do on disaster risk reduction. Children not just as subject of disaster risk reduction, but also children as drivers of disaster risk reduction efforts. So we are way behind schedule. We are 1 hour behind schedule. We will try to sort of catch up on time. So I am going to be very severe in terms of time management, particularly with the adult speakers. So I would like you to keep to time, and you have 6 to 7 minutes each so that we can hear more from children themselves. It's about them, it's not about us. So may I now invite a longtime colleague and friend, Lars Band from UNICEF. He works on disaster risk reduction issues. He leads disaster risk reduction issues for UNICEF in India. Lars.
Thank you so much, dear Kamal Kishore, for this introduction. Dear colleagues on the dais, dear audience. I have a little presentation. Yeah, thank you. You put it up. No, I very much sympathized with the words of Amita Singh just before. I think they were very valid points, but I also have a certain different opinion. I think that it is quite important, if you can go to the next slide, that we also still continue to produce figures and to produce evidence and to share this evidence. You will all agree with me that children are important and are the most vulnerable groups, and we have to work for them and we have to respect their needs in disasters. But why we have this session and why we're here in a grand coalition actually to address this topic is that we think that we still have to make a quantum loop to really make this happen. But if we want to make this happen, we have to convince you, and we still have to convince even you, even if we are talking here to the converted. I mean, we are all from the DRR community somehow, but actually this is not to convert you so much, but to take maybe some of this work we will be presenting so that you can be the multiplier to work with this. So what you will see here, I hope that, can someone really there behind give me an idea? Can you read the figures here? Someone in the last row here of the audience, you can, is it okay? Yeah, more or less? Okay, because I don't want to read all this. Actually, and this is an appeal to the organizers, if you can kindly put our presentations on the website of the conference so that people can take it from there. We cannot attend the whole conference, and we also want to learn more from you, and maybe you want to take some of our material. Basically, we try to showcase here a little bit in this presentation that usually in the times of disasters, children are more or less 70% of the victims. So there's a clear mandate that we do much more for children and to actually make them more resilient towards the disasters. The second bullet you have here is actually that you have over 8 million children who were affected by disasters in India. And you see also here the economic losses of India due to disasters only in 1 year, in 2014. But please bear in mind that most of the brunt of this will be absorbed by communities. It will not be directly by the state, by any government. So who will be affected most once more will be the children in terms of economic losses as well. We don't have to look always at, next slide please, at the big events. So here there is some data from Nepal earthquake. There is some data from Cyclone Saida in Bangladesh. And we still have in mind, I think that 15,000 people were killed in the Kashmir earthquake in 2005, which was a global outcry actually, and wake-up call. So we don't have to look only at these big figures, even though that we know that several cities in India are very much at risk of similar scenarios. We really sincerely hope it will never happen. Next slide. Now, let's be a bit more specific maybe. What does this mean? I mean, if we can go really in all these social sectors, and there we will see already the effect, be it of smaller or bigger events. Actually, the Cyclone Hudud we have been talking about so much here has been quite a positive example in the sense that basically the state and maybe the whole of India managed fairly well this catastrophe. It could have been much worse. And we heard it just recently actually in the NDMA formation days, the great stride and great work which has been achieved in Gujarat, in West Bengal, in Odisha. So there has been a lot of progress. But still, I mean, even if we look at these events and we don't have many people killed, we see that much infrastructure is destroyed. We see here that many schools are destroyed. We see here that they are sometimes maybe not destroyed, but inaccessible, and schools are used for temporary shelters. There's also the problem of teachers having to rejoin their families, so basically the education will be interrupted. These things, do we capture them really when we talk about the disaster impact? Also, we see that many ICDS centers in the health sector have been destroyed. There is a problem of access to drinking water and healthy food. So these things, also dengue. We had this dengue epidemic especially around Delhi. We were talking about heat waves. And we also have this big problem, which is air pollution, which is much talked about, but is it really addressed? Who are once again the most vulnerable? It's the children. Next slide, please. In terms of protection, really we can go through all the different sectors. We see that children's rights are usually compromised in terms of disasters. We have incidences where children will be separated from their families. There will be increased incidences of violence, be it outside the home but also inside the home due to stresses. There will be sometimes trafficking, exploitation and abuse. Actually, all the efforts to end early child marriage, child marriage in general, will be compromised at times because of a poverty trap. Next slide. We heard some aspects in the previous presentation on the impact of climate change, and indeed, I mean, India is among the top 10 countries to suffer from climate change. Again, there will be a lot of displacement. I think it was mentioned in the previous presentations. And here again, some patterns are being reproduced. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm very fast because the time is short, but you can read this later, hopefully. Basically, there are some figures, and indeed, it's very much anecdotal evidence. I mean, one study here, one study there, but we need JNU, and we have been talking to them to substantiate these figures even more and have more data. So one figure which we have come across in our research was that child stunting will be actually is likely to be increased by 35% by 2015 compared to current scenarios without climate change. This is really a big issue here. We have to take these things into account, of course, in all our programming. If we talk about disasters, we have to have a very right view of the social sectors and then particularly of the impact of children. So basically, what do we stand for in UNICEF and other partners working with children? What do we want to do? We want to work on child-centered DRR. That is to work for children and with children. We want to recognize their distinct vulnerabilities, and we want to give them a right to participate. And we are very happy that so many children accepted our invitation to come here and to speak up. Basically, it fosters the agency of children and youth to work towards making their lives safer and communities more resilient. It is a very simple thing actually, but we have to unpack it, and there it becomes more complicated. So what are we talking about? We are talking about child-centered risk assessments. We are talking about safer and well-prepared social services, comprehensive school safety, and then again, as I said, listening to children. Safe and well-prepared social services. The government of India and the states have embarked on fabulous programs to end open defecation, to work towards ending child marriage, to work about better health, better education, ending stunting, all this effect. If we don't filter in the disaster aspect and the child-centered disaster aspect in these programs, government programs, will have a hard time to really succeed their goals by the short time fixed. So let's make them really well prepared. In terms of decision making, and I was actually missing this point a little bit in the previous session, because it was on governance, and indeed there was a call on the communities. But Government of India set up a national platform, a national coordination mechanism for DRR. This met, I think, once. It has to meet again, I think, and get the children into that. Get them at the highest level and get them at the community level and all the intermediaries. So please, when you talk about DRR, when you invite the disaster management authorities in the states, you come together, involve the children not only as a token, but involve them in decision making. You will hear a lot of good voices, and I will stop by this. And so please use them. I mean, they are much better spokesperson than we are here. So I will stop here, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lars. You not only highlighted the fact that there are more children affected by disasters than any other group, but you also highlighted some specific ideas, starting from child-centered risk assessments to hearing children's voices in how to address their issues. So now let me invite a colleague from SARC Disaster Management Center to talk about regional and national policies and plans for children and DRR. Strictly 7 minutes.
Can you put up my presentation? I would like to thank the organizers for taking up this cause. As a practitioner of disaster management for the past almost 2 decades and a student of disaster management, as a father, as a teacher, I would like to start my presentation with the acceptance of guilt as a practitioner, that for the past 2 decades we see that almost 2/3 of South Asia has been out of this disaster management discourse. We see that today 36% of South Asia is children. And what we came to know, and UNICEF and SARC studies bring out, is that 70%, 36% children are their children, but 70% of all those affected are children. And they are nowhere in our policies, in our frameworks, in our roadmaps, in our district and village level plans. This all started about 2 years ago when we started coming up with the post-2015 DRR framework for SARC HFA2, where the SARC leadership came forward to identify children, school safety, and comprehensive school safety as the second key priority area for South Asia. First key priority area being community resilience. Then, as a part of, I am happy and glad to share that South Asia has been identified as a global lead. It has been acknowledged and identified by head UNISDR Margareta Wellstrom And it is the SAARC leadership, the heads of state of SAARC and the heads of disaster management in the SAARC region, which brought about two small changes, policy shifts in the way we look at our children. At the 6th Asian Ministerial Conference for DRR in Bangkok, we introduced the word comprehensive in front of school safety. This word comprehensive means a lot, because right now we were talking for the past 2 decades of disaster management in the region, we had been talking about school safety. Now, how many children go to school? And how many hours do children stay in school? It is just 7 hours. And how many disasters are covered? So we not only expanded the scope of school safety by including more disasters, but making it more comprehensive. And the word comprehensive meant especially that we see our children not as a vulnerable group, but as agents of change. And this vision of SAARC leadership was reflected in the Sendai document, where we see that the Sendai Declaration adopted children as agents of change. It reminds me of our discussion with Margareta Wellstrom, Her Excellency UNSRSG, where she said there's a serious problem with the way we manage disasters. We have classified 97% of our population as vulnerable. And when we see them as vulnerable, we don't see them as capacity. So only 3% of the people are left for disaster management across the globe. We see children as vulnerable, women as vulnerable, elderly as vulnerable, poor and marginalized as vulnerable. So less than 3% are there as a human resource capacity. So we needed to change that. And we are glad and happy to share that SAARC has led the globe having this major policy shift. So as a process, we conducted a situational analysis across South Asia, and I would like to put some data. Can you come to the next slide? Why 2015, why children, why South Asia? We all know South Asia is the global hub of disasters. Now, I'll just put some staggering figures. In Afghanistan, 5.5 million children were affected by avalanches, conflict, and by floods. Today, children constitute 55% of the entire population of Afghanistan. India, 4.2 million children, 42 lakh children were affected by just one disaster, floods. Nepal, 1.1 million are directly and seriously affected by the Nepal earthquake. 32,000 classrooms destroyed. We were fortunate, and it was an act of God, that these children was not inside the classroom. 1.5 million students would have been inside the classrooms and would have been seriously injured, or God knows what would have happened. In Pakistan, 1 million children were seriously malnourished due to drought. Sri Lanka, 4.47 million students were affected by floods, landslides. So we see that children are amongst the most affected community and disproportionately affected. SAARC region is also, now, while they are most affected, SAARC region over the past 2 decades has made considerable progress and impressive progress, and has emerged as a champion on child and youth leadership across the globe. We have good examples from Bhutan. Pakistan is a global lead as far as protecting children, and situation has changed after the recent Peshawar attack as well on several other aspects. India has demonstrated the NSSP, that is one of the finest examples of how